for being here. Super appreciate it. This is Deceptively Defensive, what Kevin McCallister can teach us about cyber defense. This is brought to you in part by Secure IT 360, the cybersecurity consulting firm where I work. I'm on the offensive security team. I have a bio slide that I will quickly breeze through. But first, a little did you know? Did you know that the global median dwell time is pretty small, actually, which is interesting, right? You'd think that I would start a deception webinar with, oh, the dwell time is super long. We need to increase the speed of our detection, and I think mainly that's not my core argument to use deception. And as you'll see throughout the webinar, I try to make a case that deception is useful for many other things, both to decrease the dwell time, the time an attacker is in the environment undetected, but also other things, which we'll share and we'll get into. But I thought it was kind of interesting that ransomware adversary notification was the cause of notification in 49% of cases, almost half the cases that Mandiant responded to. Now, Mandiant, responds to events that are maybe atypical from SMBs, but I think it's a good indicator to see where adversaries are and where kind of dwell time is. And at least we have some statistics to go off of. So the other thing that was interesting was the internal detections were about 10 days and direct adversary notifications about 5 days. So really interesting stats. And I think is kind of the core talking point I wanted to start this presentation with. But not all attackers trigger your alarms, as we all know. When they break in, when they get access to Susie in accounting's computer, when they compromise a Microsoft 365 account, many times that initial event doesn't necessarily trigger the alarm, right? It's the after action. It's the pivoting. It's the lateral movement. It's trying to dump credentials. It's privilege escalation. It's all the follow-on activities and even, hopefully not, but you get to the ransomware and the encryption event before you get notified or you get alerts that the threat actor is in the environment. So not all attackers trigger alerts when they break in. So my kind of thought is, what if we could flip that? What if, the first thing they touch, what if the first thing that threat actor does upon getting into the environment is a fake or a decoy or a trap, or as Kevin McCallister would maybe say, a digital paint can to the face, right? Maybe a BB gun, propped up somewhere. So a quick bio, real quick, for those who don't know me. If this is the first time you're hearing me talk or speak or present, my name is Spencer. I'm a recovering sysadmin, as you can see by my shirt. I am very much a sysadmin at heart. I come from a sysadmin background. I'm former help desk, systems administration, internal Active Directory Windows guy. I specialize in internal pen testing, assume breach. I've got a number of certifications to my name, and the main thing I really like to do when I'm not pen testing and doing Active Directory hacking and kind of poking is the content stuff, webinars, podcasts, which we have, which is called the Cyber Threat Perspective. So that's what I like to do in kind of my free time. I'm a maintainer on Locksmith, kind of an emotional support coder, as my friend Jake Hildreth would say. And I work for Secure IT 360, which again is a full service cybersecurity firm. We do pen testing, we do defer, we do SOC, we do ISO, and a lot of different stuff. So these webinars are purely for your value to get as much information as possible. And I make sure it's like this from time to time as kind of like a side hobby to exercise some of the left side of the brain or right side, whatever it might be. So in this presentation, we're going to talk about what you're missing out on by not using deception. We're going to cover, brief overview of what deception is, if you're not familiar, how you can kind of practically set traps. So what are some of the goals of deception? What are some of the tactics we can use to catch threat actors, to frustrate them, and ultimately give defenders enough time to respond or give them more information to go on, be able to detect those threats. Towards the end of the webinar, I'm going to share one of my favorite decoys, and I'll share a little bit about why it's my favorite and how you can maybe implement it in your environment, what that looks like. So in other words, so next we're gonna talk about what you're missing out on, right? So what are we missing out on by not using deception? Quick kind of sidebar to talk about deception as a whole, right? I think deception is not used enough because, in part, because of a marketing issue. I think EDR is really great. Vendors are really great at marketing their EDR. They have the MITRE evaluations that talk about how successful they are at detecting known threats. There's a lot of propaganda and marketing that goes into endpoint security products, email security products, and a lot of other things. But deception doesn't get the love, right? Deception doesn't get as much airtime as other things, and unrightfully so. So, what is deception? In my mind, the goal of deception is to manipulate an adversary's perception and understanding of your environment, right? You want to manipulate their thought process, their understanding, their actions through deliberate misdirection, if you will, proactive and deliberate misdirection. So we can use deception for detection, otherwise detecting threats. We can deter threats by steering them in certain directions. We can slow them down or introduce things in the environment that cause them to spin their wheels on things or go down a rabbit hole that we would want them to go down, and kind of hopefully avoid other things that are more sensitive. We can deceive them, right? We can present something that looks realistic to them that we hope they interact with, or we can use it for threat intelligence, right? We can set up a honeypot on the internet to try and discover threat actor techniques. What are the TTPs that they're going to use? What are the tools that they're using? What are the vulnerabilities that they're going after or trying to exploit? So we can use all these things in the context of deception. So, and a shout out or call out to the active or offensive countermeasures book by John Strand, Paul Asadorian, etc. Super good book, short but impactful read. Definitely recommend checking out and reading that because there's a lot of good information in there. So words mean things, and I just want to set the stage real quick and say that some people call deception by different names. Part of the reason why deception maybe doesn't get the airtime that it deserves is there's a lot of different words for it. Whereas like EDR is just EDR, right? You can have XDR, but it's really just AV EDR. Like that's the main thing. With deception, it's honey files, it could be honey pots, honey tokens, canaries, canary file, canary tokens, assets. There's a lot of different words, unfortunately, for deception techniques and just deception verbs and language in and of itself. So just when you hear that, when you hear me say honeypot or deception or canary, we're talking about the same thing most of the time. So really interesting study. I was doing research for this presentation. And I wanted to find some research because I like finding tangible things that people have studied and kind of put a lot of effort into. And so this research comes from the University of Hawaii by Andrew Reeves and Debbie Ashenden. They looked at how just announcing the use of deception technology can change or potentially influence attacker behavior. So this was presented in 2024. And again, it's the idea that just making the deception known or making believable or identifiable decoys or identifiable deception can make the threat actors second guess their actions. So you can see, honey tokens scare the bleep out of me. These are all, so as part of this research, there were red teamers that are all part of this study. And they kind of provided some insights and their thoughts on the decoy environment. So some interesting things here is that the greater attentiveness likely involves a time commitment on the part of the attacker, including added time to validate user profiles via external means. And then another person said, you'd want to be much more deliberate about your persistence because now anything you try is a risk of getting caught. And I think one of the misconceptions is, and we'll get into misconceptions here in a minute, but one of the assumptions, I guess, of a threat actor is that, the perception that decoys lack appeal to organizations because they're difficult to set up or they're time consuming or they're too painful. So threat actors, as part of this research, they said maybe threat actors would, go after certain targets, open certain files that may or may not be decoys because they believe that organizations aren't going to put in the time and effort to deploy deception. So again, kind of using the mind games and kind of manipulating the perspective and the understanding of the environment. If we believe that threat actors believe that SMBs and sysadmins don't want to take the time to implement deception, maybe we can use that to our advantage in our deception plan. So something to consider. So awareness of the end result of this study was a couple things. Awareness of decoys induced anxiety and disruption. So I know for myself as a pen tester, right? If I see certain files on a file share, or if I'm looking at an account and it just looks too good to be true, or maybe there's a description about the account somewhere, and it just kind of signals my my spidey sense, if you will, that does induce anxiety. I'm kind of fearful to open those because I don't want to get caught early on. It disrupts, the planning of the attacker. Maybe they were targeting this organization. They had a certain plan in place. If we can put deception in that, attack chain, maybe that disrupts their attack plan, right, or their mission or their target of what they're hoping to accomplish, and that it forces them to adjust and adapt on the fly, maybe make more mistakes because of that. It also increased caution and time and resource expenditure. So the psychology here is if we can implement deception and we can trick attackers into second guessing their actions or spinning their wheels on certain things, it increases the time that they spend in our environment. Yes, but it also increases the amount of actions they have to perform. And there's been a number of studies that have talked about this. The DBIR is one, but the more actions you make a threat actor make, the more likely it is that they're going to get detected. So the idea here with deception is going back to what I said earlier. It's not necessarily detecting them early. It's changing their perception and causing them to perform more actions that they didn't plan for or didn't intend to perform, in hopes that they make a mistake or they do something that's going to get caught. And then diversion or abandonment, that's just giving up, right? If we can make our environment so hostile that the threat actor is really concerned about their actions, their next step, or the file that they open, or the server that they ping, or whatever it might be, maybe they'll just give up and kind of abandon their goal of attacking our organization. The other reason, the other thing you're missing out on with not using deception is costs. Like, I believe that there's few things that are more ROI positive than some good deception technology. And you can spend anywhere from free to $7,500 plus for deception technology. There are products on the market that you can spend a little bit of money, a few $1,000, 10 grand here or there, and get some really good deception technology implemented in your environment that works really well, that's low effort, kind of set it, forget it, and works really, really well, in addition to free, right? There's a number of free resources, which I'll mention later on in the presentation, that you can use that are totally free and just as a little bit of your time. So that's a plus, right? Conversely to that, ransomware attacks are pretty bad, right? Think of any recent, data breach in the news, ransomware attack. Think of Colonial Pipeline, the supply chain impacts to that. There are massive implications to security incidents, to data breaches, et cetera, that cost massive amounts of money. Not just for the organization itself, but if it's a hospital, you have patients, you have third parties, you have all of these components, you have whole ecosystems that get disrupted from that. Imagine if you could just spend $10,000, $20,000, $5,000 to kind of curb some of that, to kind of mitigate some of that downside. I think that's a win. The other reason is, burnout. Honestly, I was doing research again for this to kind of do some analysis of SOC analyst burnout, how many alerts SOC analysts respond to. Now, a couple of these are a little bit older, 2019, 2020, but it does show an indication that many SOC analysts are responding to a high number of alerts, right? They're responding to a high number of alerts and cases, right? And I define cases as kind of like, a suspicious event that has multiple alerts, right? If you're familiar with Defender for Endpoint or CrowdStrike or anything like that, they will kind of combine alerts into one case, right? So maybe it's some sort of credential access type thing. there might be additional alerts. There might be multiple alerts tied to that, right? So analysts are responding to 10, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, sometimes 50 cases a day for multiple clients, remember. So they might have to go from one client to the next. There's a lot of context switching there. And what my argument is that there is the potential to miss things. There's a potential for burnout. There's a potential to make mistakes here because there's such a high volume of alerts and activity nowadays. And this is just something I found from Reddit. This is from 9 months ago. And they said they average over 250 alerts per day for all their clients during normal business hours. They've got about 6 to 8 analysts working, and any individual analyst may see a total of 30-ish alerts per day. And they say that anything more than 50 cases per day should be an indicator that needs to be some process improvement. So this can be very taxing and error prone. So I advocate for not just adding alerts, but adding alerts that are high fidelity, right? Adding alerts that don't contribute to the noise. They help you see through the noise, essentially. And then there's just something I want to mention. There's a Twitter post here where you can find more references to research and stuff like this, stuff like that if you're interested. But there's a podcast or a webinar that Matt Johansson did, Matty J. He runs VulnU, a newsletter, super good. I would check it out. But there's a really good webinar that he did on the science behind alert fatigue. This is with a neuroscientist, by the way, which is kind of interesting. So if you're interested in that, there's a resource there for you to check out. And then the State of Mental Health report by Tynes, kind of super good, kind of illustrates this point that we can't just add on additional alerts and plug things in and kind of like add and add and add. We need to find ways to find high fidelity, high confidence type of alerts. So we decrease that amount of stress on the people responding to those things. We can respond more accurately and faster. So why use deception? It's accurate, it's actionable, right? As you'll see when we go through the examples, you not only know with deception where that threat actor might be in the environment logically, just see in the next slide, but what level of access they might have. It's also low false positive. If I have one specific thing that's designed to only be triggered by a suspicious threat or a threat actor, you have a more true positive of a real threat, of a real issue that you need to address in your environment. And super high confidence. When you trigger these decoys, it's not just like you're triggering an alert on an endpoint that you didn't know about ahead of time. You had set this up intentionally to be alerted on, so you have high confidence that whatever is happening here is something to address. And why deception, right? The other reason why and what we're missing on in deception is super cool because it can go where no deception has gone before, right? De bold to go where no man has gone before. But deception can be placed in places where EDR, antivirus, traditional security products might not be possible. So one example that comes to mind are OT networks or SCADA networks, right? ICS. Yes, we could put it on corporate networks. We know that. But we could also put it on those SCADA networks, those ICS networks, IoT networks, stuff that's kind of at satellite offices, stuff that we don't have super great manageability of, things that we could just plug in the network. And if it's on the internet, we can get alert from it, or if it's on the network, we can get alert from it. And then that way, we're not relying on just one security control. We're not relying on EDR alone to kind of detect everything, which is what the current state really looks like right now, honestly. So where else can you add deception? Slack. You could put decoy messages in Slack. AWS, there's a ton of opportunities to put deception and decoys and honey files and honey tokens and canaries in AWS. 1Password. So your password managers, right? Your password vaults, putting fake credentials in there. Teams messages, Teams files. Think of all the Teams, chats and directories and everything that you have in there. It's it could be a really good indicator of what a threat actor is doing and what they're trying to achieve, right? If a threat actor is combing through through Teams messages and they trip on a decoy, you now have the intelligence to know, oh, they're going through our Teams messages. And then you can say, do we have anything out there that's sensitive? Is there anything we should be concerned about there? So you kind of know where they are in the environment. Same with SharePoint or Notion or Chrome, Jenkins, Azure, Confluence, Jira tickets, ServiceNow, GitHub. Deception, you might think I'm the AD guy, right? I'm the on-prem internal pen testing guy. You might think that I'd be, all up about AD deception, and I am, and there's really good opportunities for that. But it's not just Active Directory. It's not just on-prem. Even you can put deception pretty much anywhere. You can put a file, anywhere you can put a system or a host or a key or anything that can, be monitored in a log somewhere or triggered somewhere. You can put a deception asset. So deception is for who? It's for who can't afford data breaches. So just before we continue, we're going to go on to the next section of like the actual goals and tactics that we can use for deception. But I wanted to cover a couple of mistakes and misconceptions first, now that we've covered like what we're missing out on, right? So you might be thinking, we have to have this big plan. We have to have this whole strategy. We have to, think through this first, right? We got to really make sure we know what we're doing before we do this. Well, actually, I was talking with Haroon Mir, who's the founder of Thinkst, and he said one unusual fail condition they saw early on, meaning early on in the company when they started Thinkst, was people who overthink the deployment. They want to have a deeply perfected plan, or they want to have a whole bunch of scenarios or ideas of what attacker might do in their environment. And he said they effectively lose the value of the kind of set it, forget it, kind of quick and easy setup process that you can do with things or with other deception technologies. And he says it ends up just being much better if you just do it, right? If you just drop something in, 2 minutes, forget it until it alarms, profit essentially, right? Win essentially. The other misconception that I commonly hear too is it's too advanced, right? We need, these complex things, and we need the system, and we need to get the logs into our SIM, and we got to do all this, fancy stuff. And it's kind of like the analysis paralysis thing. It kind of stops us from actually getting value from these products. And I think that's one of the other reasons why deception isn't as popular as it is because of these two misconceptions. People overcomplicate it, and they think it's too advanced. And my advice is crawl, walk, run, right? Think about any security tool that you've ever deployed. None of it, I venture to guess, has ever been 100% perfect or has had 100% sophistication from day one, right? Some of this stuff, you can start small. You can get some quick wins early on to be able to show that the investment is worth it, and then continue to invest in it and continue to make it better and enhance it and forward and kind of progress as you move on. This is not something that you need to deploy in a weekend and has to be completely perfect and fully robust and all worked out and all the kind of edge cases figured out. No, not at all. You just need to do it. You just need to get started with it, start small, and you can absolutely do it. So an overview of deception goals and tactics. So now we're going to talk about the fun stuff. We're going to talk about Home Alone. So I'm going to play this real quick. It's like a short clip, and hopefully you all can hear it. And then we'll talk about attracting and observing.
I'm gonna kill that kid!
All right. So I leaked my Miss Rachel cartoons for my daughter. So attract and observe. So this is one that lends very well to detection, right? And by the way, with Home Alone, for anybody who knows or maybe doesn't know, Home Alone is full of these scenarios where virtually any one of these techniques could fit for all of these scenarios, right? So I'm using these to kind of illustrate a point, understanding that a lot of these concepts overlap there's a lot of intermingling, and a lot of these can be applied in multiple lanes or multiple tactics, techniques, etc. So in this case, Marv's physical location is revealed as a result of his screams in pain, right? He opens the window, he steps out, he screams in pain by stepping on the Christmas ornaments. And the equivalent to that for cybersecurity, right? If somebody trips over some deception asset or a honey file or a canary token, you can use that to detect their activity, but you can also potentially detect their permission level. So at this point, maybe it's a file on a file share, right? You now know that if that's the HR share, they have an account that has that level of access, right? And if you've done a good job with least privilege and kind of restricting access to your shares, to some extent what level of access they have, what permissions they have in your environment, which to me as a defender, right, putting on my defender hat is super valuable, right? I might know that they only have a certain level of access. Maybe they haven't gotten full domain admin access yet, which is great. I can hopefully contain that threat. So unveiling their permission level is one aspect. The other aspect is their physical location, or in the case of a network, their logical location, right? So Marv is coming through the living room window, if you will. We now know, in that file share example, we now know where that threat actor is. They've gotten to the file share. And if you've got a segmented network, again, if you have least privilege, if you have these layered controls, you can kind of begin to understand and put a picture together of what their access level is, what their logical location is, and where they are in relation to your environment and to your network. Cool. The next one is disrupting and wasting time, aka delaying. It's one of my favorite ones. All right. So stalling or delaying. This one is maybe a little less understood or less kind of talked about in terms of deception. I think many people commonly think of deception as, detecting when a file gets opened, or detecting when some threat actor interacts with a service or a honeypot kind of thing. Delaying is also a very viable strategy. Might be a good goal or a tactic that we could use, again, to increase the amount of steps the threat actor has to take, thereby increasing our chance to detect them. But you can do this with what's called tar pits, which is just a service or a honeypot. You can do this on a honeypot as well. It's usually some sort of service or server that purposely will delay incoming connections or respond with like drop packets or kind of interrupt the communication, right? So if I'm trying to do a port scan, maybe there's some sort of service that will drop packets or intentionally respond with bad information or misinformation, etc. You can deploy these fake services to entice threat actors to interact with them, and thereby hopefully making them spin their wheels and delay and waste their time. So this is deterring. This is a 2-minute clip. I'm just going to speed it
Get the hell out of here.
All right, Johnny.
But what about my
I love
money?
this one.
What money?
AC said you had some dough for me.
That a fact. How much do I owe you?
AC said 10%.
I got a little pop
Bet
culture
AC ain't in charge no
fun
more.
fact for you guys after
What
this.
do you mean?
After we watch this.
He's upstairs taking a bath. He'll call you when he gets out. Hey, I tell you what I'm gonna give you, Snakes. I'm gonna give you to the count of 10
Gotta love the wet
to get your
bandits.
ugly, yellow, no good keister off my property before I pump your guts full of lead.
All right, Johnny, I'm sorry. I'm going.
1, 2, 10. Keep the change, you filthy animal.
All right. So anytime I watch that scene in particular, my kids always love it. It's such a hilarious thing. But fun fact, I don't know if anybody knew this, but this movie, the scene, or like the 1950s movie or whatever it is, 1938 Angels with Dirty Faces movie, was apparently not a real movie. It was supposedly made for Home Alone as a parody of that Angels with Dirty Faces classic. So little fun fact. I don't know if anybody can fact check that, but that's something I figured out in my research. But anyways, Kevin uses this, the movie scene, the loud gangster kind of talking and shooting his Uzi, to think that there was a dangerous adult inside, or that somebody was gonna like actually shoot him, right? It caused him hesitation, it caused him concern and anxiety and all the things we talked about earlier. So from a cyber deception standpoint, we could potentially use things like security products. If we can implement security products either externally in job descriptions, or kind of put information out there of things that might be in place that threat actors would be really concerned about from a detection standpoint, maybe that can help deter some of those threats. Another classic. I know I'm kind of picking on Marv, but I had to give Harry some love as well. So misdirection and confusion. Again, like I said, there's a lot of overlap with these. A lot of these can be applied to different, various techniques. But I bet you after holding onto that red hot door, Harry was kind of second guessing his moves. He was kind of second guessing the next door handle that he touched, the next door that he went through, or the next step that he took. Right. Same with Marv and the nail on the step or the ornaments. They're second guessing their moves. They're slowed down because of it, right? And from a cyber deception standpoint, if we can confuse the threat actor into manipulating their thought process and, again, their goals, and second guess their actions, they will end up slowing down their attack. It's just a natural process related to that. Or they won't, and they'll continue blasting through the environment. And that's a win for you, because you just get a whole bunch of high fidelity alerts from all this deception that you got. So this misdirection and confusion can help slow them down, help provide defenders more time to be able to respond, and essentially give defenders the upper hand. Misdirect them and move them the path that you want them to go to, or go down, and away from the real assets or the real data or the real accounts or systems that you're actually trying to protect. Then here's the last one. This one's really funny because of the obvious like skeleton that they use. It's just like, it's just hilarious. But we can use deception for luring and kind of revealing a threat actor's intent as well. So like I said earlier on, we can use it for intelligence gathering. So Marv turning on the sink handles, him, going through the house in a certain way, how, his patterns of how he's moving through the house, trying to get into the house, reveals information about his intent and about what he's trying to achieve, right? Through the various deception methods that are implemented here. So if we can entice threat actors towards certain deception that we've set up, we can then begin to kind of identify and uncover or discover their intent. Again, with the file share example, maybe they're going for HR files, and they seem to be really kind of keying in on those HR files, employment files. Maybe this is an insider threat. Maybe this is an employee kind of snooping around somewhere where they shouldn't, trying to get payroll information or look at everybody else's salaries or something like that. Or maybe it's some sort of, ransomware actor who's looking for backups on a file share, right? So don't think about deception as just a static like Word document. Think about it strategically in the sense of what would this deception tell me if it was triggered, right? By where it's placed, what it's named, the characteristics of it. You can get actually a lot more sophisticated with it without adding, a ton of complexity to the whole process, which is great. You can lure them down a path we want them to go, reveal their actual true intent, right? There we go. So the cybersecurity equivalent, right? Just real quick before we move on. Detect. We want to attract and observe. You can use honeypots, honey files, fake credentials, etc. When it comes to delaying, maybe you want to have tar pits or fake services or things that threat actors will spin their wheels on and try and exploit or discover exploits for. When it comes to deterring, maybe we can have publicly facing indicators that showcase or kind of identify certain products or certain controls that we have in place that we know threat actors would have a lot of trouble with, like application control, WDAC, or something like that. We could deceive, right? Fake files, admin accounts, and kind of misdirect them, kind of direct them down a path one way to hopefully avoid the actual admin accounts over here. And then obviously discovering luring intent, like I said, the intelligence aspects of it. We can use all those things, all those techniques. We can use honeypots, honey tokens, various things to reveal what it is they're trying to do, how they're trying to attack us, maybe help us predict their next move, or more or less kind of understand what their goals are so we can get ahead of it and hopefully respond a little bit quicker. So ultimately, the goal of deception, right? Like, what are we missing out on? What is the goal? The goal is to detect threats and evict them, right? This funny saying of like Kevin, right? Like, keep the change, you filthy animal. We want to like make our environment so hostile, so dangerous, and just like so frustrating and confusing that they just give up. Like, we want them to, essentially crawl back to whatever hole they came from and cry, right? So we can have a plan. I have some strategy involved in this webinar. We're going to talk about that just briefly. But I do want to illustrate or reiterate the point of just getting started. That comment that Haroon made of like, just get started is really important here as we move on to kind of like a strategy of, okay, now that we know what deception techniques we can use, where do we place them, right? Like, where do we put the deception? So here's our battle plan, right? I spent a lot of time making this in Canva. But this is our battle plan, right? This is what Kevin had in his house. So just like Kevin McCallister, he developed his battle plan for his home. We can develop our own deception plan. So we can have documents, we can have shares, we can have EXEs or binaries and honeypots and website clones and all this stuff, right? We can actually have quite a bit of strategy with it. Like I said, we can understand what permission level the threat actor has, where they are in the environment. There's a lot of intangible things that you can identify that you can't with other security technologies. But again, I just want to stress the importance of crawl, walk, run, right? We can do a lot of stuff. We can do a lot of fancy things. So there's a lot of sophisticated things we can do. But some of the beauty with deception comes in its ease of use, its simplicity, and how quickly you can get something running, get up to speed, and get a lot of value early on in the process. So we're going to really kind of touch on that the rest of the webinar. So you want deception to be plausible, right? You want it to be believable and blend into the environment, right? This is, I love this meme because it's just like illustrates the point exactly. But you also want to invoke curiosity, right? You could argue that this invokes curiosity, but it's not believable. So we'd want something a little bit closer, right? It should be enticing enough that someone who has nefarious intent would click on it, they'd go after it, but not so believable that it's a dead giveaway, right? Remember that research article is that, yes, maybe it's a good idea to have it kind of be like, if the threat actor looks at it and they're like, is that deception? Could be. Maybe it is. I think it might be. That's the kind of the idea, the kind of like the emotional feeling we're going after. And in that research article, again, they talk about, overt versus, overt or semi-obvious decoys may achieve this valuable strategic outcome, right? Of luring unsuspecting attackers because of that emotional feeling, right? And then announcing the use of deception technology can have valuable outcomes Awareness of deception technology may cause some attackers to find a softer target, while others will take more time and forego easily exploitable vulnerabilities. In other words, we hope that they just give up, or if not, they're going to take more steps because they're not going to be exploiting the easy one-click, RCE things. They're going to have to try harder. It means they're going to take more steps and perform more actions. So where should we place canaries, right? What we don't want to do is just put them off on an island or put them somewhere that doesn't make sense, right? Like the meme says, create decoy plant, wait for alert, can't remember where I put it. So in other words, what makes good deception? So there's 3 things that I think make good deception that I wanted to include in this webinar. One is match the environment and typical activity, right? So if you're using an account and that account is your decoy, you want to look at the last logon time, the last password reset. You want to make sure that that account looks like it was used recently, because a dead giveaway to me is if there's some sort of like admin account and hasn't been logged in 10 years, or the last password reset was like 8 years ago, I'm not going to necessarily believe that as much as I would if it looks like it has some recent use to it. Likewise with a Windows Server 2003, right? Very old legacy system that attackers might target, right? If I'm on a pen test, I'm like, oh, there's definitely some exploits for that. I might target that. But if I'm in a Mac only environment or a Linux only environment, or if I'm on some SCADA network, for example, maybe that doesn't blend in as well, right? So we want to match the environment, match what would be typical representative in that environment as best we can. Make it enticing, right? It should appear worth pursuing. It should be something like a text file that indicates there's some potential admin creds in there, or sensitive data, or help desk files, or sorry, payroll files. And the third thing is integrate with real systems. And what I mean is throw some decoys in your document management system, right? If you're a law firm, you have like iManage or NetDocs or something, throw some decoy documents in your DMS. Maybe you put them in different cases or different, I forget what they're called, but different section of your DMS, right? Different cases, different at various access levels, right? Put them in file shares, in different environments, integrate them with real systems. All right. So getting on to the good stuff. These are some real examples, right? So real examples of deception assets, tools, canaries, honey files, etc., that you can use to confuse, frustrate, and detect attackers. So the first one is documents. This is probably like the epitome of a canary, right? Is you download this canary token from Thinks or canarytokens.org, which is a great resource. It's like, I have another slide later on, but it's like 29 plus free deception assets or decoys that you can implement. Essentially, you just download, you create this decoy, this canary, you download it. You can even fill it with real information. So if you wanted to put your company boilerplate in there, your header, make it look like a real document, you absolutely could. And then when that document is opened, a request is sent out over DNS, and it indicates that that canary has been opened. You get an alert for it, and away you go. You have a real high fidelity trigger or alert when something opens, when somebody or some process opens that document. So a really good one. These can be littered throughout your environment and provide a really, really good deception layer. Like I said, think permission level, think logical access, and you can place these strategically to provide very high fidelity alerts. The next one is accounts. This is one of my favorites because I'm an AD guy, but you have to do it right, and you have to be aware of kind of the signals that a threat actor might be looking for to determine if it's fake or not, if they're going to interact with it. So having a description with a password in it, solid. Having logon hours, right? Really, really important is that especially if you give this account any kind of access, you want to restrict the logon. So when the threat actor gets the password for it or they try to log in, they're met with this dialog box that says account restrictions are preventing this account from signing in. So it's like, huh, that's weird. Now that right there is potentially a giveaway. But guess what? Already got the alert. So it doesn't present any indications to me as a threat actor until I see this dialogue. And then I'm like, oh, I might be cooked. That's where the manipulation and kind of like the mind game comes in. It's like, is this an account that's just like restricted for some reason? Or is this a canary? Like, I'm not sure. That's where the mind games come in. And this is where it's really valuable. But you can just, capture the event logs from the DC and query for this. So if you're using Sentinel or Splunk or Logrun, whatever your SIM is, this is very easy to just run a query for this and create an alert from. Pro tip for this, use accounts that you find misconfigured on pen tests. So one of the little hacks or kind of like tricks of the trade is if you have an account that has like unconstrained delegation and you found that on a pen test, or an account that has misconfigured permissions or something, take that account, turn that into a canary or a honey account, right? Turn that into a deception asset, because that's something that's the most realistic, right? It was found in your environment. You can't get more real than that. So use that in your deception. All right, the next one is shares. So shares is really good. I think this is a less known one or maybe a less utilized one. But essentially, this is when you set up an alert on a specific share. So again, remember what I said about permission level and logical access. So maybe you have a locked down backup share, right? That only certain people should get to. Or maybe it's an HR share or an accounting share, something like that. Well, you can turn on object access auditing, and you can get an alert when somebody interacts with that file share. You can get an alert when they check the permissions, when they navigate to that file share. And again, same with the document, or same with the account. You can run a KQL query from Sentinel, Splunk, or whatever your SIM is. You can just pull the logs in, and you can detect this very easily. So there's a gist or a gist. I don't know how people pronounce it. I say gist, I guess. There's a gist from GitHub that has this code for anybody that wants it, and I'll share the slides once the presentation's over, so you guys can grab that. The next one is VMDK files. So this is straight out of a pen test. So I was doing a pen test just recently. This has happened a number of times, by the way, but there was a share that was readable by everyone, and there happened to be a VMDK file for a domain controller, like DC01 VMDK on the file share that I could read. Well, there's a tool called Volumizer. Great tool, by the way, by I.C. Cobb, the author. I forget his real name, so I apologize. But this Volumizer tool allows you to mount file systems like NTFS, like VMDKs, VHDX, and all those other kinds of things. You can mount them and interact with them, right then and there on the files on the computer. So you can actually navigate to the ntds.dit file. You can download the SAM database and all that. You can download it offline. You can crack those hashes, or just pull out the NTLM hashes and use those for pass the hash, pass the ticket, etc. So this is very attractive, especially domain controller or an SCCM server. You can get creative with this, but this takes a little bit more setup, right? You spin up a VMDK, and you want it to be believable, right? So spin it up. Make sure it obviously is not something that you use in production that has production credentials in it, obviously. But this one is very enticing, and will definitely be a high fidelity alert for you. I mentioned Canary tools. It's one of my favorites. Shout out to Haroon. Canary thinks who makes Canary tokens, and then they also have a commercial paid product that is really good as well. But they have a ton of free tools, 29 different free canaries that you can set up quick and easy, that are really, really good. So lots of love out to them. Super, super good resource that they offer completely free, which is amazing. The login page clone. So this is another one that I really like. This is something that we used to use back in the day. I know Brad, the director of VP of offensive security, rather, has talked about how he used to use it before in the past, and I'll share that. So he would take his login pages from when he used to work in financial services, and he knew that one of the things that threat actors like to do is they like to clone their login page and trick people into getting their credentials, right? They used to use it for credential theft. So they would put CSS or HTML or JavaScript on their login pages so that whenever that website was cloned, they would get an alert. So you can do this with canary tokens. You can do this kind of manually yourself. There's a number of other tools. But cloning your login pages can be a really good indication of something, nefarious happening. And in this case, the Entra ID login page in particular can be identified when it's cloned, which is really helpful for those Microsoft 365 credential theft, like phishing, man in the middle type attacks, right? The session theft and that kind of thing. SAML IDP app. So imagine your company uses 1Password, or maybe you use Psychotic or Delinea now or something else, right? Maybe you don't actually use LastPass. But something we know historically, right, is that threat actors like to get into LastPass vaults. So you could spin up this SAML IDP app, throw it out there, and anytime that is interacted with, you get an alert for it. LastPass, password managers, Bitwarden, 1Password. Anytime I see that on a pen test, I'm immediately going to see if I can log in. Like, it doesn't even matter. It's like literally flies on honey, like, because those are where the credentials are, right? Those are where the secrets are. And if I can get to that, maybe that gives me everything I need to kind of like fully compromise the environment. So very good idea from a deception standpoint. We're almost wrapping up. This is the last one, and then I'll talk about my favorite decoy and some resources, and then we'll wrap it up hopefully early. So honeypots, there's a number of honeypots. Some are better than others. I wanted to call this out. I haven't used every single one of these, but just to illustrate the point that you don't have to, use all the paid options. You can go free. You can do it yourself kind of thing. Although there is economies of effort and scale when you do go commercial product, but you very much can do this kind of on your own, homegrown if you want to. And there's a number of resources here for one little kind of side story. Jared Fulkins, who sent this to me, he said I could use this in the webinar, and something interesting that he found. So these two pictures, this is a device that somebody he knows caught probing the network. So probing this person's network. This is the device that was plugged into their network. And how he caught it was he used server batteries in their control planes, apparently, to identify login attempts. He essentially just alerted whenever something tried to log in to that backup battery thing. And when that happened, they sent an alert and got information, and they tracked it down, and they found this device hiding out in their network. So pretty homegrown, pretty wild, actually, if you look at it. Pretty incredible. All right. So last slide before my favorite decoy, okay? So other deception that don't require an Active Directory environment, I put this out on Twitter because I was talking about a lot of Active Directory-based deception, but like I mentioned earlier with the Slack, the Teams, the SharePoint, Confluence, all that, we can use fake API keys, right, in GitHub repos, but documents in cloud storage or in ticketing systems or DMSs. We can create decoy LinkedIn profiles, right? We could create fake emails, S3 buckets with dummy data, login pages, et cetera, et cetera. Kind of the point is, you're kind of only limited by your creativity, your threat model, and kind of your resources. So getting close to wrapping up here, my favorite decoy is the unattend file. So the unattend file, for those who don't know, is part of Microsoft deployment services. And when you spin up a new machine, you can have like this file, this answer file that runs a whole bunch of stuff for you. So in this case, you can use it to set up a local admin account and its password. Many times on internal pen tests, we will find this unattend file, and it'll have the password for the local admin account in the environment. And if the environment doesn't have laps, many times this is a valid password, and we can use it to pivot around the environment. This is a very high value kind of technique to get the local admin password, particularly if the organization is not using laps. So with this password, we can spray it around, we can pivot to other machines, and essentially have our way with the environment. So threat actors know this. They will look for this file. They will try this password. And if you have alerts set up on logins, failed logins, or successful logins for this administrator account, this is another high fidelity way to capture, suspicious activity. This is not something that Susie in accounting is going to try and do. She's not going to try and log into the administrative account. I promise you. So the great thing is you can capture these logs from your EDR. If you have your EDR everywhere, you have these decoys set up, you can set this up in your EDR and you can create alerts from it, or your SIM, whatever you're capturing logs in. This is very high fidelity, very easy to set up. And there are templates coming up where I will show you that you can just grab right off again. So resources. Wrapping up the presentation here, I just want to share a couple resources and then we will close it out. So shameless plug for my own content, but we did a podcast episode about analyzing threat reports. One of the common questions I get is like, what do I use for deception? Well, this this presentation kind of answers that to some extent. And I go through some examples in this video on my YouTube of like how you can look through the threat report and how you can pull out actionable ideas for deception in this video. So if you want, go check it out. It's on my YouTube. Our podcast, we talk about deception a lot on our podcast. This is a podcast episode dedicated to deception technology. So it's episode 130. If you're curious and you haven't seen the podcast, go check it out. It's completely free. We don't pitch anything. We don't sell anything on the podcast. We don't have sponsors or anything like that. It's fully supported by Security 360. And it's just there for value. So we talk about deception in this episode. This was given to me by Jamie Williams, Jamie Anne Social on Twitter, threat intel researcher at Unit 42. This is a great kind of like compendium or knowledge base for adversary engagement operations, if you will. So if you read through this, you'll have a really good understanding of the language to use, how to conduct these adversarial engagement operations, and how to think about these things. So super good resource. From Crude Solutions, really good resource. And like I said earlier, just a minute ago about the unattend file, there is an example unattend file in this GitHub repo, along with a web config, which is also another really, really good deception. But shout out to Mike Manrod for this. He put this repo together with some really good kind of boilerplate decoys that you can start with. So to wrap it up, I know we're coming up on time, 12:58. We're nailing the time. Really stoked about that. My last piece of advice is, this is your house. You have to defend it, right? Defend it like Kevin McCallister. Defend it like your life depends on it. Make threat actors really, really, really regret they ever messed with you, that they ever thought they could do anything in your environment. Make it volatile and frustrating and confusing to adversaries. And hopefully that has all been helpful. And hopefully I've inspired someone to go out and deploy some deception technology today. So that's it. We are Secure IT 360. I'm a pen tester there. We do a lot of different things. These are our slicks. If we can be of any help to anybody, please reach out. We'd love to hear from you. And I will end there at 12:59 and we'll go with questions. So thank you. Thank you. I'm going to pull up chat now. All right. I am pulling up chat. All right. I'm going to scroll to the top. Taylor said, are there links to research going out with the slides? Yeah, I'll make sure you guys got links for the slides. Yeah, Canary can go where an agent cannot, Mike. Yeah. Sounds coming through. Okay. Question. Have you ever considered putting beacon payloads in bait files to dock certain CDI from their host to a public location? I'm not sure. Have you ever considered putting beacon payloads in bait files to dock certain CTI? You stumped me on that one, Mike. I'll have to come back to that one. Fact check. Thanks, Casey. Angels with Even Filthier Souls is a fake film made just for Home Alone 2. Oh, nice. Thanks, Evan. I appreciate that. I appreciate you saying that. We have the paid for canaries, but I'm excited to deploy some other countermeasures too. Awesome. Thanks, Sari. Thanks, Mike. Would you recommend looking for off-the-shelf tooling for deception, or if you have the internal resources, build your own custom ones? I would do both. If it were me, I would get some stuff up and running kind of like immediately. get some high value stuff implemented in places where you think are going to be most useful. So go with like a paid solution to start off with, something that you can, again, get up to speed quickly with. You don't have to spend a lot of time managing it, kind of set it, forget it kind of things, get some value early on, and then kind of think about strategy. Where can we put things? What are we kind of hoping to achieve? Then you can kind of work on some of the strategy and kind of mind game aspects of it. But I would recommend trying to get value first with a commercial solution, unless you're a glutton for punishment and you just have all the time in the world and you want to DIY everything. Hakon, hopefully I'm saying your name right. Hakon or Hakon. Where would you showcase as an org that you are using deception technology? On the company homepage, branding, login sites, other places, in regards to the paper? It's a good question. So I think the logical place to do it is job descriptions. Job descriptions, that's something that we look at in terms of OSINT when we're doing like social engineering or external pen testing, things like that. When we're trying to get some information about an organization, job descriptions are a really good place for that. So if there are things you want to kind of like hint at, that would probably be a good place for that. Awesome. Good questions. Any other questions? I know we're past the hour, so a lot of people probably need to dip, but any other questions, comments? Anybody want to talk about Active Directory? I feel like I barely talked about Active Directory all this webinar. I'm really, really disappointed. Thanks, Evan. Thanks, Mike.
I will say every time we watched a video, it was like, the teacher when they would bring the TV out in class. That's what it felt
Yeah.
like. It was pretty awesome.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, fire away, Evan. Give it to me. Yeah, 80. Okay, take that as an action. Maybe like an Active Directory focused deception webinar. Or maybe like Active Directory / on-prem focused. But Evan, yeah. What's your question? Fire away. Fire away. We'll give it another like 5 or 10 minutes for questions. If we want a Honey Token AD account, how do we make sure it's not a liability if it's used by a cyber criminal? My recommendation would be, one, preventing the logon of it. So you can do that with logon hours. You can do that with group policy and make it so that it cannot log on over the network anywhere. And then you want to make it have a really, really long password, right? Like 250, I think the max is 254 characters now or something. So I would have a long password, not be able to log in anywhere, have login hours restricted. Those would be my top 3 things to kind of look at first. For anyone who wants an AD, maybe Nikki, you can find a link for it and drop it in chat. We did a webinar. I did a webinar on hardening Active Directory to prevent cyber attacks. So Evan, if you go to offsec.blog and you search for harden AD webinar or AD webinar, you'll probably find it. Maybe Nikki can drop a link in chat for it. But we did do a webinar on hardening Active Directory, so you probably would like that one.
Yeah, let me see if I can find it right fast.
Hakon, do you see most deception tech being used locally in AD environments? Yeah, most of the deception I see, because I do internal pen testing, right? Internal assume breach pen testing. So I do get into the Entra world a little bit with Entra ID and Azure to some extent. But most of the deception I see day to day, like day job wise, it is Active Directory environments. So it's a lot of files, honey accounts, like Canary account kind of things, like so Active Directory accounts. Those are probably the 2 most common ones I see a lot. But I agree, there's a lot of potential to put deception in a lot of other places that you might not initially think, like Slack and Jira, Teams. Lots of great possibilities there. Curb roasting, AS rep roasting, honeypots, absolutely, 100%. Make it, like I said, 250 character long password. Throw that thing out there. Absolutely. Definitely recommend, sorry. Would it be beneficial to allow login for a honey text file with a plain text password? To allow login for a honey file? I'm not sure I follow the question. Maybe I'm just misreading it. There's the Insecure Active Directory protocols. We also did a webinar, Nikki.
Oh, okay.
Oh, to detect if they're using a leaked password. Yes. So you're saying like put a password in a text file and then trigger on somebody using that password? I think that's what you're going at. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a good strategy too. It's like you have this kind of like this little text file, this nuanced thing out there that looks kind of like it could be something. You could even do it in like a web config. So you could trigger on the web config, but you could also trigger on failed login for the account that's in the web config. So yeah, or the text file or whatever. So yes, you could have double duty there, right? Like you could have even a higher fidelity signal, right? If the web config file or the text file gets triggered on an alert, and then a minute later, the credential that was put into that file was also triggered for a failed password. Like that's very high fidelity. Either it's an admin that is unsure of the environment and doesn't know it's out there, or it's a known threat. Like that, there's only two possible outcomes in my mind for that. Napoleon, I would work in automation, not necessarily the SOC. How would you suggest someone like me approach the conversation with the security teams to implement these kinds of controls? Hey, thanks, Icon. I appreciate it. Super. Thanks for saying that. I appreciate it. So if you work in a SOC or you work in automation or threat detection, how can you have these conversations? Let me think for a minute before I answer emotionally. I think the ROI of deception cannot be understated, right? Like you can literally create a Word document yourself or a text file yourself, turn on auditing, and catch bad guys. Like in order to do that with EDR, you need to spend $100,000 to get EDR. And then you need to be trained how to use EDR. I think the ROI value alone is an argument in and of itself, right? Like we spend a lot of money in security. Security is billions of dollars in the industry. If we can spend a small amount to do what other things cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to do, I think that's a win. And then you can spend that money on other things. Like you can spend it on advanced, authentication firewalls. Like I'm a big fan of Silverfort. You could spend it on that. You could spend it on Netrix. Netrix has a lot of great products. We could spend it on a PAM solution. So what's great is you save a little bit of money, on your security spend by implementing these deception techniques where you can, then turn around and spend it other places and kind of show like, hey, we're spending a very little amount of money for high fidelity alerts. I think that's a pretty big win in my opinion. Do you recommend pairing alerts with automated responses if your SIM has that ability? For example, locking a user account that activates a 1Password canary. Absolutely. It's definitely the next step, right? Is that XDR, if you will, approach, or that automation approach. Definitely recommend if you are able to, like that web config example that I just mentioned, right? If the web config file is opened and there's a failed password, failed login for that credential that was in there, you know that something bad's going on. That there's no way that should be a legitimate activity. You nuke the account, you isolate the machine where the login came from, and you go DEFCON 5 or whatever, right? Like, absolutely. Definitely recommend, Evan. Great point.
Yeah, so the webinar, I think I'm gonna have to send them separately, unless you know that there's a link. Because I didn't see the webinar, I just seen the podcast.
Yeah, let me find it. Harden AD webinar OffSec. It is, I think it's this one. Yeah, okay. So for those who wanted the Hardened AD webinar, it's right there. Okay. I answered that one. Which do you prioritize for internal honeypots? Low versus high interaction? Which you prioritize low versus high interaction. I guess I guess it depends. If you mean like, do you mean like high interaction versus as in something that a threat actor is going to be highly enticed by, or kind of like moderately enticed by, or are you talking about something that is uh like a honeypot that has a whole bunch of open ports and services, so you're hoping somebody kind of like does a port scan of that host kind of thing? Um, in terms of honeypots, in terms of level of interactivity or just alert on interaction. Okay, I see. I think I see what you mean. So you're talking about like, should we alert on just the activity of like port scanning versus the actual like interaction with the host kind of thing? Maybe is that what you meant? Um, in terms of interactivity and interaction, yeah, okay. I think probably both. So if you have a honeypot, let's say, and you've stuck it over here in like a segmented VLAN, you definitely want to know when something's poking at it. That's not one of your systems, right? So definitely any kind of interaction with a host, especially like if it's a port scan, uh, or if you have a login page, if somebody, hits a 200 on the login page, um, you know, that would probably be my recommendations, like trigger on the initial interaction to start. And then if you want an additional capability, like maybe there's a fake SSH server with default creds or something, you could then alert on. There are some products that allow you to like screen record, if you will. So you could actually capture the terminal commands that the threat actor is using. So you could do that on top of that. But I would definitely alert on that initial interaction of like the port scanning, the logging in, banner grabbing, those kinds of things initially, because that's like the initial kind of like footprint of that interaction, if you will.